Lowestoft's most famous son was the composer, pianist and conductor Benjamin Britten. He was born here at Sand Cliff, 21 Kirkley Cliff Road, on the 22nd of November 1913. Edward Benjamin Britten was the youngest of 4 children. His father, Robert Britten, was a dentist, and his mother, Edith, was an accomplished amateur singer, pianist and active member of the local musical society. He had 2 sisters, Elizabeth Barbara, known by her second name, Charlotte Elizabeth, known as Beth, and a brother called Robert Harry, known as Bobby. As a young child, Benjamin was affectionately called Benny by the family, and Ben by his friends for the rest of his life. The family had moved to Lowestoft in 1908, and Ben's father soon set up a dental practice within this house. They were a close family, and thanks to their mother's passion for music and performance, the children were encouraged to be creative. From a very early age, Ben was composing music and writing songs for his mother to sing, and taking part in theatrical performances for family and friends. His earliest surviving composition dates from 1919, when he was only 5 years old. Ben's bedroom was at the top of the house, with panoramic views of the sea. This made a deep and long-lasting impression on his life and later work. Photographs of the town at the time Ben was a boy show a bustling seafront, grand hotels and people on holiday, lots of fishing boats including drifters and trawlers and pleasure steamers. Lowestoft was a town in its heyday, full of straw boater hats and sleek motor cars, a busy and exciting place to live. All of this could be seen by Ben from his bedroom window. Walking north up Kirkley Cliff Road on his way to school, Ben would pass Kirkley Cliff Terrace, which was built over 40 years earlier. Many of the properties were high-class boarding houses, which we would now call bed and breakfasts, where people would come to stay for a beach holiday and enjoy spectacular views from their rooms. Opposite Kirkley Cliff Terrace was South Lodge. It was a preparatory school for boys which had opened in 1862. Ben started attending South Lodge when he was 8. Their advert stated, "Boys are received between the ages of 7 and 14 to be prepared for public school or the Royal Navy. The average number of boys in class is 8. The school buildings consist of 3 large houses, a gymnasium and a carpenter's workshop. The school has its own playing field of 5 acres and a good playground adjoining the main school building. The school buildings overlook the sea and occupy an unusually healthy position." Ben was a keen sportsman and loved playing cricket and tennis in the playground. His love of these sports continued all his life. Music was not taught at South Lodge, and so Ben took piano lessons with Miss Astle, who lived a few doors down from his home. Between the ages of 8 and 10, Ben produced a great deal of piano music and numerous songs for his mother to sing. In 1924, aged 11, he began taking viola lessons with Audrey Alston, who encouraged her students to attend as many live music concerts as possible. His talent was clearly developing. We have turned left to walk along Claremont Road. At the end, we cross the road onto London Road South. Today it is full of shops, just as it used to be when Ben was a boy. The Kirkley post office would have been busy all weekdays with people bringing and collecting parcels and posting letters. As there was no such thing as the internet or mobile phones, writing letters, picture postcards and sending telegrams was the most common way people would keep in touch. Few people even had a telephone in their house. Therefore, the post office was a very important building. Ben wrote letters and sent postcards from a young age and continued throughout his life. In those days, clothes were handmade, and Ben's father would visit Frederick W. Masterson tailors at 164 London Road South to be measured for his suits. Later, as an adult, Ben wore his father's morning suit and evening tailcoat regularly and looked extremely good in them, according to Beth. A few doors from the tailor was South Lowestoft swimming baths. Every Sunday, Ben's father would go there for a hot bath after lunch. The baths advertised hot and cold seawater baths, which were meant to be very good for people's health. As we turn right into Waterloo Road, we pass a large corner shop that used to be a big grocery shop where people would go for their weekly shopping. This was built in 1892 for John Devereux and Sons Limited Grocers. In the days before supermarkets, people would walk into a shop like Devereux's and ask an assistant for their shopping. Lots of items like tea, coffee and sugar were sold loose, not in plastic bags. There were jars and tins and fresh eggs for sale. Assistants wearing smart aprons would weigh items on big iron scales and then wrap them in paper. Even butter was carefully wrapped up for the customer. Devereux's advertised a Christmas club to help people save up for the festive season, and their famous football tea, which they suggested gave players extra energy. We cross Waterloo Road and then cross at the lights. We then turned left towards the Hatfield Hotel, which was built in the 1850s. This whole area was designed and created by the Victorian developer Samuel Morton Peto in the first half of the 19th century. With architect John Louth Clements, Peto created a great deal of this part of Lowestoft. It is hard to believe that originally there was nothing here but land leading down to the sea. Peto brought the railway to Lowestoft and built the first esplanade and many of the grand houses on the seafront and close by. He then developed the harbour and turned Lowestoft into a prosperous town and seaside resort. When Ben was a boy, Lowestoft was always busy. The harbour had a thriving fishing industry, and fine beaches, hotels and boarding houses kept the town busy with tourists for most of the year. Walking along Marine Parade, we passed number 46, which is where Mr. and Mrs. Britten lived when they first came to Lowestoft from Ipswich with their little girl Barbara. Robert was born there in 1907. Marine Parade was part of Peto's development in 1852, and the houses were a mixture of private homes and boarding houses for tourists and holidaymakers. Continuing north towards the harbour today, we walk past what is now Royal Green. But this view looked very different when Ben was a boy. The Royal Hotel opened in 1847 as part of Peto's grand plan. In its heyday, it was considered to be one of the biggest and best seaside hotels in the whole country. In 1892, it was so popular that the owner decided to open yet another hotel further down the coast past Ben's home called the Grand Hotel. Throughout the year, and especially in the summer, people would arrive by train and motor car from all over the country and beyond to holiday in Lowestoft. Kirkley boasted some magnificent hotels, including the Hotel Victoria opposite Ben's home, which is still a hotel today, and the Empire Hotel, which is now the site of a local primary school. Reaching the East Point Pavilion, we pause and turn left, looking back towards London Road South. Here once stood the grand St John's Church, designed by the architect Clements, which opened in 1854. This early Victorian Gothic stone church, with its tall spire which could be seen from miles around, played a very important part in Ben's life and that of his whole family. As an adult, Beth wrote about their childhood and remembered, "The family attended church services every Sunday, and this is where Ben performed in public for the very first time." Turning right towards the War Memorial, it is a sad reminder of the great loss of life suffered during both World Wars. Lowestoft was on the front line. For Ben and his family, the reality of World War I was a very real threat. His sister Beth wrote about what happened to the family in 1916. Although Ben was very young during the war, he was aware of all that was going on around him. Behind the memorial stands the Royal Norfolk and Suffolk Yacht Club and South Pier. The clubhouse was built in 1903, and Ben's father was a member and would go there frequently to meet friends. Ben and the family would sometimes meet him there, often on Sundays, after a walk over the bridge and along the harbour to the fish market, which were mostly deserted, apart from the Scottish boats. They never fished on Sundays. In those days anyone could walk there, but many locals didn't, as they thought it too smelly. However, for Ben, his brother and sister, and their mother, they thought it the most interesting part of the town. Walking past the yacht club and onto the South Pier, it is a very different view today from what Ben was used to seeing. In the 1920s, Lowestoft Harbour was full of fishing vessels. There were steam drifters, trawlers and sailing smacks, and when it was herring season in the autumn, it was said that the harbour was so full of boats that the fishermen could walk across them from one side of the harbour to the other. Herring girls, known as Maggies, would arrive from Scotland. They followed the Scottish fishing fleets that came to Lowestoft. Beth talked about it all in her book. She remembered, "It was amazing to watch the girls at work, both the gutters and the packers. They packed in enormous barrels, at the start disappearing from the hips up, then gradually they reappeared as the barrels became filled. They packed so beautifully and so rapidly. As it was November and dark early, they worked by the light of flares. I have never again seen such a sight. An area of 2 or 3 acres with hundreds of girls wrapped in colourful scarves against the cold in that eerie light. As a family, we were enormously interested in the fishing. We had our favourite boats and knew all their names." As we walk around the corner towards the seafront, we reach an area of the beach that was known for many years as Children's Corner. When Ben was a little boy, this area was always packed with children and families during the summer. Then there was a small shallow bay and beach, which was where it was safe for children to paddle. One of the most popular attractions was the daily Punch and Judy shows. This was a comical puppet show with characters like Mr. Punch and his wife Judy, the baby, a crocodile, a policeman, and some sausages. Mr. Punch was very naughty and made the children laugh so much they always came back to see more. Summers were exciting in Lowestoft. In a letter of June 1923, Ben wrote to his mother, "It's Lowestoft and Alton Broad Carnival Week. Last night we saw a ripping procession. The fire engine, lifeboat, advertisements, etc. Edwards the tailor had a ripping advertisement, a man with a very big mask on and a huge straw hat." Beth remembered their childhood summers on the beach. In the afternoons on the South Pier, a military band played. We spent a lot of time with Nanny, of course, on the pier. On the beach there were also attractions, the chief among them being the Punch and Judy show, which we loved. Walking south down the esplanade past the empty space of Royal Green, which when Ben was a boy would have been very different, apart from the Royal Hotel, there were also terraces of large houses, only some of which still remain today. Most of them were boarding houses for holidaymakers. We can only imagine how busy the seafront would have been with people on holiday at the height of the summer. Unfortunately, damage caused during World War I and II from bombing raids meant that many of the houses were demolished and turned into Royal Green. We arrive at a statue of Triton, created by the famous sculptor John Thomas. This marks the southern end of Peteau's original grand esplanade. There is another near South Pier we passed earlier. In Greek mythology, Triton was the son of Poseidon, the god of the sea. Whereas his father's symbol was a trident to symbolize power over the waves, Triton's was the conch shell, which he used to calm the waves. Here the sculptor has depicted it as a horn of plenty to represent the rich harvest of the sea, a fitting symbol for Peteau's vision of Lowestoft as a place of prosperity. Looking right, we see Wellington Gardens. The gardens came into existence and were laid out when Wellington Terrace, so named because work began on it soon after the Duke of Wellington's death in 1852, and were completed in 1856. At the same time, Peato's original promenade was extended to Claremont Road. The gardens were redesigned in 1920 at a cost of £800, which was still a lot of money in those days. Therefore, when Ben was a boy, this was a familiar sight as he walked home. In the old photograph, beyond the gardens, we can see Ben's school and the road leading back towards his house. Walking south, we reach the pier. Claremont Pier was an important focal point of Kirkley seafront. From his bedroom window, Ben would have been able to see all the activities of holidaymakers. Beth remembered, "In the summer, paddle steamers went daily from Yarmouth to Southend, calling at the Claremont Pier in Lowestoft packed with holidaymakers. As children, we watched the steamers from the nursery window, saying, 'Going, going, gone,' when they finally disappeared behind the houses." The pier was originally 600 feet long, extended to 760 in 1913, the year of Ben's birth. It was designed by D. Fox and built by the Coast and Development Company, that ran Belle pleasure boat trips from London. It was opened in May 1903, and that very afternoon, the first passenger steamer, the Walton Belle, landed the first passengers amidst great cheering. Passenger steamers would arrive daily from as far as London via Felixstowe, bringing holidaymakers to the town by sea. Some steamers carried as many as 300 holidaymakers at a time. In 1928, a concert hall was built with seating for 900 people. At the pier entrance was the Blue Lagoon tea rooms. Beth remembered the donkey rides that started from the pier. She and Ben felt sorry for them. We also watched and sometimes rode on the donkeys going up and down our road in summer. They started at the preparatory school, South Lodge, at the bottom of the hill, and passed our house. We were always so sorry for them, the poor creatures, when they had to carry some very heavy people. Walking back towards home, our view is of the South Beach looking south towards Kensington Gardens and Pakefield. Coastal erosion is a worry for people who live in Lowestoft today, but it was a very real worry for families when Ben was a boy. During his childhood years, many houses were lost to the waves in nearby Pakefield. He and Beth would regularly go and play on the rocks at Pakefield. These were not rocks at all, but parts of the houses that had fallen into the sea. Earlier this had happened in Kirkley, and so temporary wooden sea defences had been installed to protect the cliff and the houses above from the fury of the sea. In family photos of Ben on the beach, we can clearly see the defences. The sea walls, defences and promenades we see today were completed by the outbreak of World War II. Today we look down at the beach and beach huts. The Britten family had their own beach hut, in which they loved spending time, as Beth remembered. Our beach hut was a great joy to all of us, one of a row of permanently built huts at our end of the town, for residents only, and whenever we were able, we spent all day at the hut. Mum would bring our meals and have them with us. She made it very pretty with curtains, nice china, tables and chairs, etc. We became expert at swimming in rough seas, jumping or going over the waves. To get to the water, you had to go down some steep wooden steps. We were young and daring. Returning to where we began, near Ben's childhood home, one wonders about his dreams and hopes as he looked out of his bedroom window at the sea and his town. In 1927, Ben's mother took him to meet the well-known composer Frank Bridge, who recognized something extraordinary in him and offered to teach him how to compose music. From that day, Ben's life changed, and his journey to becoming a great composer began. Years later, as an adult, Ben vividly recalled a childhood coloured by his coastal upbringing. In 1951, he was granted honorary freedom of Lowestoft in Sparrow's Nest Park in the north of the town. Then, aged 37, Ben had lived in Suffolk for all but 8 years of his life. When accepting the honour, he said this: "Suffolk, with its rolling, intimate countryside, its heavenly Gothic churches, big and small, its marshes with those wild seabirds, its grand ports and its little fishing villages, I am firmly rooted in this glorious county." His childhood memories of the sea, the people who lived near it, and those who made a living from it, had an important place in his life and music. As a child, the daily sounds of the North Sea fired his imagination and inspired him to go on to become one of the most influential composers of the 20th century. Benjamin Britten, boy of this town.